Then he gets into this arpeggio thing where he goes. So the beginning of that is just a B flat major arpeggio, right? So if you look at your C minor pentatonic or E flat major pentatonic, these two notes are in the pentatonic scale. This note is not, but that's, if you're looking at C minor pentatonic, that's just your ninth. And we've talked about a bunch of times that a ninth is always a cool note to play. So this B flat major gives you, again, if you look at this note, this note, this note, and this note, in the pentatonic scale, that's in there, that's in there, and that's in there. The only note that's outside is the ninth. So a little theory thing, B flat major, if you're playing C minor pentatonic, you can play a B flat major arpeggio over it, and you will just, the only note you'll get different, it's all pentatonic basically, you'll just get that ninth, which is really a cool note. So anyway, so he plays those three notes, so the 11th fret on the B string to the 10th fret on the E string to the 13th fret on the E string. So, and then he uses the bar and he kind of dips down and up just a little bit. So then he plays that note again, the 13th fret on the E string, but he doesn't pick it again. So it's so he plays that note and waits a beat, and then he slides up without picking it again. So the note almost dies out a little. So it's, then when he reaches that note, he plucks it again. So he's sliding from the 13th fret to the 18th fret on the E string. So that's, then he doesn't pick it again. He lets that note ring, and he pulls off 4 notes in a row from the 18, 17, 16, 15. A cool little chromatic thing. So that whole thing is, and he adds vibrato on that note. So then he walks right back up from the 15, 16, 17, 18 on the E string. So the whole thing is, then he slides into this arpeggio, which, again, this is like an E flat major arpeggio. But he starts with the 14th fret sliding to that 15th fret. And then he goes down the arpeggio from the 15th fret on the E string to the 16th fret on the B string to the 15th fret on the G string. So that whole thing is... and then he bends this up a whole step, and then he bends it up maybe a step and a half above that. So he bends it up a whole step, then up 2.5 steps. It's a real quick bend. So that sounds like this. Then he goes from the 15th fret to the 16th fret on the B string, back to the 15th fret, and bends that up back to the 16th fret, so a half step. So it's, the whole thing is... So he bends it up and down, 15th fret, up and down a half step, goes to the 11th fret on the B string, back to the 13th fret on the B string. Now, the reason why I play this over and over again, one, it's to get it in your ear kind of thing, and a lot of people say that really helps to hear the parts one after another. But the other reason is because it helps me keep track of where I'm at. I kind of lose it, so I'm going to play it again. So there it goes. Again, it bends up that half step. Then it goes down to the 11th fret, to the 13th fret of the B string, back to the 11th fret, and when it gets to that 11th fret, it goes to the 13th fret of the G string, but quickly slides down to that 10th fret of the G string. So that whole thing is... Now, also one thing, when he bends that up, that whole step, that's double, that 2.5 steps, he doesn't pick that note. So it's so he bends that first note up a whole step, and then he just kind of shoves it up the rest of the way. So then when he slides down to that 10th fret, you're in this pentatonic scale again, right? So you have, he goes down to the 10th fret to the 8th fret. Then he plays that 10th fret again and bends it up and then hits it again when it's bent up. So, and then he plays the unison note on the 8th fret of the B string. So, then he does a typical blues thing where he's bending that 10th fret up and down a half step and pulls off to the 8th fret. So then he goes down to the 10th fret of the D string, and then he hits that G string 8th fret twice. So then he goes into this kind of country bend kind of thing, which he does a lot. He did a lot of session work on country CDs, so you'll find a lot of his guitar playing if you go in the country realm. So it's basically going from the 10th fret of the G string to the 8th fret of the D string. Then he goes back to the 10th fret of the G string and bends that up a whole step. So, and then he bends up a whole step and he grabs that 11th fret on the E string. So that's... Then he does that typical, that bending up and down a half step from the 10th fret and pulls off to the 8th fret. Then he goes down to the 10th fret of the D string and plays the 8th fret of the G string twice. So that whole thing is... Now to get that note up there, you can use your hybrid picking, chicken picking, and use another finger, or you could use the pick, one or the other. I use a lot of the chicken picking. I think Dan does also. So, then it adds vibrato, and then it quickly slides into. It goes back and slides into that same note. So it slides into the 8th fret of the G string, then it walks up a scale from 8, 9 to 11, and he plays that note twice, I think. Maybe 3 times. I think twice. I don't know. Twice. Then he does, like, you barely hear it, but he does an octave. He slides up from that 13th fret on the B string to the, I'm sorry, the 11th fret on the B string. Slides up to the 13th and back to the 11th. But he adds an octave in there. Now, I don't know if that was in post, like he did another track with that, or if he actually did that, but it just sounds really, really cool. So you basically played also with that 11th fret, you play the 8th fret on the D string. So that whole thing is... just does a little trill between those scale notes again. So from the 9th fret to the 11th fret, back to 9, back to 8. So and he lands on that 9th fret. So and he plays that, and he adds vibrato on that. Then he plays that note again, and he hammers on. So from the 9th fret to the 11th fret. So the whole thing is. So there he goes to this, he phrases on this 10th fret and 8th fret of the G string. He bends that up, but you barely hear him actually hit it the first time. So that's... So he bends it up and back down. Then he hits it pretty hard and he plays it twice. And then he plays the 8th fret and 9th fret on the B string. So it's... And he hammers that on and goes back to that 8th fret. So the whole thing is... And there he goes, that's what he does. He hammers on from the 8th fret to the 10th fret on the G string, and then he slides back up to that 10th fret of the G string.